what's strange? Sometimes our greatest miracle happens in the very place where everything seems lost. I never imagined that a hospital room, cold, quiet, and lonely, would become the most sacred place of my life. I know it sounds crazy, but it was there, surrounded by needles and diagnoses, that I was healed on the inside before I was ever healed on the outside. A lot of people think that to have an encounter with God, you have to be in a church or live a perfect life. I used to believe that too, until I was hospitalized with a serious condition. No visitors, no strength to believe in anything anymore. All I had left was silence. And in the middle of that silence, he came. No warning, no sound, just a peace that turned everything upside down. For those who don't know me, my name is Maria Ellis. I'm 49 years old, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I work as a department store supervisor. I'm not a pastor, I'm not a missionary. Honestly, I was just another tired soul trying to survive. But that night, lying in a hospital bed, I experienced the impossible. Want to know what happened? I'll tell you. But let me say this up front. This story isn't about religion. It's about a love that breaks through walls, diagnoses, and even despair. Some days, your body speaks louder than your voice. In my case, it was screaming. I had been dragging myself around for weeks, ignoring the pain, thinking it was just exhaustion piling up. But there was something deeper, a kind of silence inside me that I didn't know how to name. By the time I checked into the hospital, I could feel it wasn't just my body that needed care. It was my soul that was completely worn out. I barely smiled. I spoke even less. And whenever someone asked how I was doing, I'd answer with a fake, "I'm fine," that even I didn't believe. The hospital room felt like a mirror of what was going on inside me. Too white, too cold, too still. The active supervisor, the strong woman, the Maria who always had things under control, she was gone. All that was left was someone wondering where her joy had gone. I didn't even read my Bible anymore. And prayer? Only when things got really bad. And even then, I had that nagging doubt, does God still hear me? At that point, testimonies of overcoming felt like something that happened to other people. Me? I just felt numb, disconnected from everything, even from God's presence. I remember a nurse walked in smiling, trying to make small talk, and I couldn't even look her in the eye. It wasn't pride, it was exhaustion, physical and spiritual. The Holy Spirit? I couldn't even remember the last time I thought about him. The only things keeping me company were the beeping of the heart monitor and the loneliness stuck to the ceiling. But you know what's strange? God has a way of choosing the most unlikely places to begin a miracle, especially when we don't even have the strength to ask for one. On the second day in the hospital, Dr. Michael walked in with that serious look no one ever wants to see on a doctor's face. He was kind, careful with his words, but the moment he said, "It's more serious than we thought," everything inside me fell apart. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the illness itself or what it revealed, how badly I had neglected my body, my health, and my spiritual life. That news shook my soul more than it shook my physical heart. It felt like God had placed a mirror right in front of me, and I didn't like what I saw. In that moment, I felt like all my weakness was laid bare for the world to see. Me, the one who was always helping others, now needed to be taken care of. And the worst part? There was no one around. No family, no friends, no prayers whispered out loud. All I had was a distant memory of an old faith, a faith I hadn't nurtured in years. And that's when the question hit me. What if this is the end? Is this really how I want my story to end? Never having truly experienced the presence of God? Never letting the Holy Spirit touch me in a deep, personal way? People say a bad diagnosis is a death sentence. But for me, it was a wake-up call. Yes, it hurt. It still hurt. In my body, in my pride, and in my soul. But for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of hope, a tiny crack of light. And sometimes, when everything's falling apart, that's the only way God can start to rebuild us. Still, I resisted. Even there, lying in that cold hospital bed, I told myself I just had to push through a little longer and everything would go back to normal. What I didn't realize was God wasn't trying to bring me back to normal. He wanted to make something new. From that 6th-floor hospital room, I could see part of the city through the window. Down below, life kept moving, cars coming and going, people rushing around, building lights flickering on as the evening came. Charlotte felt so far away, so disconnected from what I was going through. It was like I had fallen off the map, like the world had forgotten I existed. I never imagined loneliness could scream so loudly in the middle of such a vibrant city. The truth is, I felt invisible, and that hurt more than any physical pain. You know that feeling of being replaceable? Like if you disappeared today, no one would even notice tomorrow. That's exactly how I felt. The store where I worked, the coffee break friends, even the church I used to attend now and then, silence. The Holy Spirit felt just as absent as the visitors who never came. And when Nurse Grace would ask, "Do you need anything?" what I really wanted to say was, "I need someone to see me." But I'd swallow hard and just nod. At that point, a miracle still felt like a distant dream. The reality was, I was just surviving. But it was in that silent routine that I began to understand something. Sometimes God allows us to go through isolation so He can show us just how disconnected we are from ourselves. I had always seen myself as someone useful, productive, but not as someone loved. And that had nothing to do with the outside world. It had everything to do with me. Maybe that's why the Holy Spirit waited until I was still, stuck in a hospital bed, to come visit me. Because only then would I stop running from people, from myself, and most of all, from Him. During those first few days, I still held on to the hope of hearing a knock on the door. I pictured someone walking in with flowers, or at least with a smile and a simple, "I came to see you." But the days kept passing, and all I heard was the sound of stretchers being wheeled down the hallway. Nancy, my sister, nothing, not even a text, and she knew I was in the hospital. It's not like I expected much. Our relationship had always been distant, but a part of me still thought, maybe this time she'll show up. She didn't, and the emptiness that left behind, there's no way to really explain it. The truth is, I didn't start feeling lonely in the hospital. I had been feeling alone for a long time. The hospital just stripped away the distractions. When life is full of routines and responsibilities, we fool ourselves into thinking we're surrounded. But all it takes is a pause, or being forced to pause, to realize how many empty chairs are actually around us. And honestly, I felt like I deserved it, as if it were some kind of punishment for how far I drifted from God, from people, and from myself. In moments like that, stories of healing and redemption feel like they belong to someone else's life. But that's exactly when the Holy Spirit starts working, when everyone else has left the room. The lack of visitors wasn't just painful, it was revealing. I began to see how much of my life was built on shallow connections, and how that had kept me distant from God's presence. Because when your heart is filled with noise, there's no room left to hear His voice. And it was right there, in the silence of that room, with an empty chair in the corner that I started to notice something I couldn't quite name yet, but it was already drawing near. It's easy to say you have faith when life is going okay, right? I used to say I believed in God. I went to church from time to time, even shared a few Bible verses in the WhatsApp group. But there, lying in that hospital bed, I realized my faith was like an umbrella left in the trunk of the car. I only remembered it when the storm hit. And let me tell you, the storm came. The difference was, this time I found myself completely unarmed. My relationship with God was shallow, almost mechanical. And the Holy Spirit? Just a distant memory from sermons I half watched. I started thinking about all the times I got emotional in church, but never let it change me. All the prayers I prayed without truly believing they'd be heard. That's when I saw it. My faith was like a membership card. I belonged to a church, but I didn't know the owner of the house. And that broke me on the inside. The miracle I was hoping for in that hospital, maybe it didn't begin with healing my body. Maybe it had to start with confronting my soul. God was showing me with both firmness and love that He didn't want religion. He wanted relationship. That's when the question hit me. What if God still wants to speak to me, even now? Even with this weak faith, even with all these doubts in my heart? And strangely, somewhere deep down, I felt like the answer was yes. That He's not offended by our weakness. He just wants us to stop pretending everything's fine. And that first step, acknowledging where I really was, that opened a tiny crack. A crack wide enough for God's presence to start pouring in, even if I didn't realize just how much it would change everything. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon, and honestly, I almost didn't answer. I was tired, emotionally numb, But when I saw Laura's name on the screen, something made me swipe and hold the phone to my ear. She hadn't spoken to me in months, maybe even years, yet somehow it felt like she had called at the exact right moment. Her voice was soft but steady, and she got straight to the point. "Maria, I've been praying for you. The Holy Spirit stirred my heart this morning and told me to remind you, you're not alone." That shook me. Part of me wanted to hang up. The other part just wanted to cry. In that moment, I didn't know whether to feel angry or grateful, because hearing someone talk about God when you feel abandoned by Him, it hurts. It hurts because it touches something we've been trying to hide. Laura spoke about prayer so naturally, like it was something she practiced daily. Me, I could barely form a single thought before God. And still, there she was, telling me she was interceding for me. Her prayer made me uncomfortable, and then it brought me peace. It felt like heaven was starting to knock on my door. I hung up and just stared at the ceiling, still unsure of what to feel. But one sentence she said kept echoing in my mind. "Maria, sometimes we think God has gone silent, when in truth, He's just drawing near in the quiet." That broke me. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope, a whisper inside saying, maybe there's still time. Maybe the miracle I was waiting for wouldn't come with the sound of thunder, but would begin with a simple phone call full of God's presence. That night, the pain felt different. It wasn't just physical. It was like something inside me was collapsing. My fever spiked, my body was cold and drenched in sweat. And for a moment I thought, am I going to die here? But right then, in the middle of that fear, a prayer was born. It was quiet, weak, barely formed. I didn't say much. I just whispered, "See me, Lord." It was a raw request, no fancy words, no theology, just the cry of someone who couldn't carry their silence any longer. I was never the kind of person who prayed long prayers. I always thought I had to be in the right mood. But there, between the beeping of the heart monitor and the drip of the IV, I realized God doesn't wait for perfect words. He waits for honesty. And in that moment, my only prayer was to be seen. Not healed, not blessed. Just seen. Is there anything more human than that? Pain taught me to stop rehearsing lines of faith and just open my heart. And it was strange because even though I felt weak, I could sense that something was starting to move inside me. You know that feeling that you're about to find something, even if you don't know what it is? That's what I felt. Like that tiny act of praying, even at my lowest, had lit a candle in a dark room. And honestly, I can't explain it, but something about that short, timid prayer made the room feel a little lighter. Like the Holy Spirit had heard not just my voice, but my silence too. And without me realizing it, he was already on his way to meet me. It was around 3 a.m. The hospital was wrapped in a deep, almost sacred silence. I was awake, but too drained to think about anything. Then, suddenly and without warning, I felt a peace fill the room. It wasn't emotional, and it wasn't psychological. It came from the outside, and at the same time from within. A gentle warmth settled over the space. It wasn't a fever. It was something else. It felt like someone had opened an invisible window and let heaven in. There was no sound, no flashing lights, just the quiet, undeniable presence of God. My eyes filled with tears for no apparent reason. Not a word was spoken, yet something was speaking to me. I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see anything supernatural. But I knew, with a certainty that needed no proof, that the Holy Spirit was there. It felt like he had sat beside me in silence, just to remind me, I never left you. In that moment, the loneliness that had been suffocating me simply disappeared. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only cry. And strangely enough, that crying felt like an answer. A prayer answered without words. Everything looked the same. The white walls, the machines, even the faint hallway light. But nothing was the same. The room had changed, and so had I. In that moment, I realized the most important visitor wouldn't arrive with a bouquet or a familiar voice. They would come softly, powerfully to restore. And he had come. God's presence doesn't need to be announced. When it arrives, you just know. And in that instant, the miracle I had been asking for was no longer a request. It became an experience. One that, without me even realizing it, was just beginning to go deeper. I had been hugged many times in my life, but never like this. Because what I felt that night wasn't a touch on my body. It was a touch on my soul. It was like something warm, light, and deeply loving wrapped itself around me from the inside. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't a fever-induced dream. It was real. The presence of the Holy Spirit embraced me in a way that no words can fully describe. I didn't just feel comforted. I felt healed, even though I didn't yet know exactly what was being restored. The strange thing was, my body was still sick, but my heart was on a completely different wavelength. I was feeling a love so complete, so secure, that for a moment, I forgot all about the physical pain. It was like being back in the womb, where there's no pressure, no fear, just pure belonging. An inward embrace. A peace that made no logical sense, given the circumstances. It was as if God himself was saying, "I found you, Maria, and I'm not going anywhere." That's when I realized the true miracle in that hospital wasn't something I could see, it was something I could feel. There, in that mixture of tears, warmth, and silence, I understood something. The Holy Spirit doesn't always show up in big events or loud church services. Sometimes he comes like this, a quiet embrace that moves in without asking for permission and heals things we didn't even know were broken. And that hug, that real intimate presence, was just the beginning of something even greater that he was about to do, both inside me and all around me. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Nurse Grace walked in with her usual cheerful attitude, but she paused when she checked my vitals. "Huh, your fever's gone," she said, frowning like she was trying to find some medical explanation. There hadn't been any new medication, no change in treatment, just improvement. Naturally, she noted it in my chart and went on with her routine. But I knew, deep inside, I had an unshakable certainty. The miracle in the hospital had begun. And it wasn't just about the fever. It was about everything that had started to change inside me since that night. I didn't say anything right away. I just smiled, unable to hold back the emotion. It felt like God was whispering, "See, I'm here." The Holy Spirit hadn't just visited me, he left evidence. And one of those signs was that sudden physical improvement, unexplainable by human logic. I knew my journey wasn't over yet, but that little moment felt like God's signature on my story. And it taught me something. Not every miracle comes with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet, like a fever that simply fades away. That day, I looked out the window and somehow Charlotte didn't feel so far away. The sky looked bluer. The food had more flavor. I was still in the hospital. There were still tests and unknowns, but the weight had shifted. It was like God had lifted a giant brick off my shoulders. And the most beautiful part? Grace, without even knowing it, became a witness to that miracle. When she said, "Your body's responding well," I thought to myself, my body is responding to heaven's touch. And the truth is, I was too, in every possible way. After that night, I realized something had shifted, and it wasn't just the fever. What God was doing in me ran much deeper. It felt like he was gently reorganizing my soul piece by piece. I could feel an old weight slowly lifting, resentments, guilt, past hurts. It was like he was quietly removing them one by one. The Holy Spirit didn't come just to touch my body. He came to reach parts of me I had locked away for years. You know those wounds we learn to live with but never really heal? Those were the places where he started to work. Memories came flooding back. People who had hurt me, words that still stung, dreams I had buried out of fear of being disappointed again. And the most amazing part? It didn't hurt to revisit those things. It was like someone was right there beside me, holding my hand and saying, "Can we clean this up together?" And in that moment, I finally understood what it means to be healed on the inside. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about being set free from the weight it had on me. My testimony of healing was being born, not just from a physical miracle, but from an emotional and spiritual new beginning. The biggest transformation I experienced in that hospital was this: realizing that God didn't just want to restore me so I could go back to how things were. He wanted to give me a brand new life, one with purpose, with lightness, with freedom. And it all started when I let him reach into the deepest places of my pain. The miracle in the hospital wasn't just in the thermometer. It was in a heart that, after so many years, was finally learning to beat with hope again. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. I started praying out loud, and the words just flowed. They weren't rehearsed phrases or those empty repetitions I used to say before meals. This was different. It was like every word came with a strength that wasn't mine. My lips were moving, but my heart was just following along. And right then, I realized the Holy Spirit was praying through me. I had never experienced anything like that. It was intimate, gentle, and yet incredibly powerful. The words were building me up, even as they came out. I could hear myself saying things I never would have had the courage to say on my own. Promises, surrender, trust. And the most amazing part? None of it was scripted. It was like my soul was finally being taught how to speak by God Himself. You know those moments when you try to pray but feel stuck? Well, that moment felt like heaven was unlocking something deep inside of me. It wasn't emotion, it was transformation, and it left a mark on me. It was the first time I truly understood what it means to be led by God's presence in prayer. From that day on, I never prayed the same way again. Not because I had learned some new technique, but because I finally knew I didn't have to pray alone. The testimony of healing was beginning to take shape in the words that flowed out of me, words filled with healing, with tears, and with the unshakable certainty that He was right there with me. And as I spoke, something even deeper was starting to form within me. After that prayer, I cried, but it wasn't an ordinary cry. It came from deep inside, like I was releasing years of stored up pain. I couldn't stop. Each tear felt like it was carrying away an old weight. Fear of rejection, shame from bad choices, that constant feeling of not being enough, all of it was running down my face. And the most beautiful part? Even though I was crying alone, I didn't feel alone. It was as if the Holy Spirit was washing my soul, drop by drop. I had never let myself break down like that before. I was always the type to hold back the tears, get up, and keep going. But in that hospital, surrounded by tubes, tests, and silence, God showed me that healing can come through vulnerability. The miracle wasn't just that I left the hospital alive, but that I left whole. The tears I used to hold back became part of the healing process. I cried and smiled at the same time. I felt pain and relief together. It was like being born again. And that experience didn't come from a formula. It came from God's presence touching places no one else could reach. When we think about deliverance, we often picture someone shouting, being carried, or having some dramatic encounter. But for me, it was quiet and deep. It happened on a tear-soaked pillow, in a chest that felt lighter, in a calmer breath. And I understood this is what freedom feels like. To breathe without guilt, to sleep without fear, to live without dragging old ghosts behind you. And little by little, even that hospital room started to feel different. That white room, once cold and lonely, started to feel sacred. Nothing in the decor had changed. There were no special visitors that afternoon, but I saw everything differently. The place where I had suffered, where I cried, where I felt forgotten, was now the same place where God found me. The same floor that once felt like a prison now felt like an altar. That's when I understood. An encounter with the Holy Spirit doesn't depend on a fancy church or a lively worship service. He comes where there's honesty, surrender, and hunger for Him. The walls that once felt like they were closing in on me now felt comforting. I started playing soft worship music on my phone, opening the window to let the breeze in, and even the sunlight seemed to shine differently when it hit that space. Mrs. Margaret, my roommate, even said, "There's something about this room. It brings peace." I smiled because I knew what she was feeling was the presence that visited me every day.
And I started to realize my heart was being shaped. That room wasn't just about physical recovery anymore. It was about spiritual transformation. In that place, I began to pray more, read the Bible verses Laura sent me by text, and write down the things God was speaking to my heart. It wasn't just a hospital anymore. It became a place of rebirth, an invisible altar full of meaning. And I realized when God visits a place, it's never the same again. Not the place, not us.
It was on an ordinary morning with no visits expected that the door slowly opened and in walked Pastor Jonathan Mills. I was honestly surprised. He was the pastor of the church I occasionally attended, but we weren't close. Still, he walked in with a gentle smile, holding a small Bible in his hands, and said, "Maria, I felt in my heart that I needed to come here. I just couldn't ignore the pull." I stayed quiet for a few seconds. I didn't know what to say, but deep down, something in me knew. That visit wasn't just a kind gesture. It was confirmation. God was showing me that He saw me, that He cared. The pastor sat beside me and we started to talk. I opened up about everything I'd been going through in that hospital, the pain, the loneliness, and most of all, the visit from the Holy Spirit. As I spoke, I saw tears fill his eyes. He just nodded and said, "This is real. He found you, Maria. How beautiful." Before leaving, he prayed for me. It wasn't a polished or fancy prayer. It was simple and sincere. And as he prayed, I felt another wave of peace wash over me, like God was gently whispering, "I will finish the work I started." That visit left a mark on me, not just because it was unexpected, but because it reminded me that God's care comes in many ways, even through a hospital door, with a Bible in hand and the right words at just the right time. I didn't expect anything from my sister anymore. Nancy and I hadn't spoken in years. Old issues, unresolved words, and hurt that it turned into walls. She knew I was in the hospital, but she never called. So when I heard her name at the reception desk, I thought it had to be a mistake. But it was her. She walked in slowly, carrying a bag, and with eyes full of something. I couldn't tell if it was shame or regret. We just looked at each other in silence. Neither of us knew how to begin. Until she said, "Maria, I had a dream about you last night. You were crying, and I saw Jesus hugging you. I woke up with this weight in my chest, and I came." That completely broke me. I cried, she cried, and in that hospital room where so many physical wounds were being treated, God began healing the wounds in our souls too. We talked for hours. We asked for forgiveness. We laughed about childhood memories. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I had my sister back. The Nancy who used to fight with me, yes, but also the Nancy who protected me when we were little. And I knew right then this was a miracle too, because only the Holy Spirit can put back together what seems too broken. He didn't just heal my body, He healed stories. He healed bonds. A few days after my sister's visit, Dr. Michael walked into the room with a soft smile. "Good news, Maria. Your test results have improved dramatically. We can discharge you." For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. It wasn't just the end of a hospital stay. It was the beginning of a new life. The woman who had come in broken, in pain, with a soul full of silence, was no longer the same.
As I packed my few belongings, I looked around that room with gratitude. Every sleepless night, every tear, every whispered prayer, it all had a purpose. That hospital room had become the place where I met God, an altar disguised as a hospital bed. And now I was leaving restored, not just physically, but with a heart at peace, a reignited faith, and a new hunger to know more about the God who met me in the quiet. As I stepped through the hospital doors, I took a deep breath. Charlotte was alive out there, but now so was I. And unlike before, I knew I wasn't walking alone. He was with me. The Holy Spirit, who found me in my darkest moment, now walked beside me as a promise, as a comfort, as a constant presence. And I knew my life would never be the same again.
It's hard to put into words what happened that night. But if there's one thing I can say with all the certainty in my soul, it's that I was never the same after the day the Holy Spirit visited me in that hospital. It wasn't just relief from the pain or physical sign in my body. It was something much deeper, a transformation that changed how I see life, how I feel the world, how I understand faith. That gentle presence, that warmth that filled the room, that embrace I felt on the inside, none of it was my imagination. It was real. It was God. I didn't need explanations, just surrender. And in that moment, fully surrendered, I was completely embraced. I didn't become perfect, far from it, but something inside me was lit, a quiet, steady fire that still guides me today. Now I live with the deep certainty that I'm never alone. Pain no longer defines me. Abandonment no longer limits me. The past no longer holds me. Because in that hospital room, while the world was asleep, heaven came to meet me. And there, in room 408, I discovered what it really means to be loved by God. That was the day everything changed. The beginning of my new story. Maybe you're listening to my story and thinking, does God still do things like this today? Let me tell you with all the conviction in my heart, yes, He does. And if He found me when I was alone, broken, and out of strength, He can find you right where you are, even in the places no one else sees. But here's the real question. Are you willing to make room for that encounter? Are you going to keep living on autopilot, or will you hand the reins over to the one who can change everything? Don't let this be just another video you watch and forget. What if this becomes a turning point in your journey? What if you prayed today like someone who truly believes God can visit them too? What if the next hospital room He transforms is yours? If you felt God speak to you through this story, if something stirred deep inside, subscribe to Faith Story. Because here, every video is a new chance to reignite your faith, to remember that heaven still answers, and that your story is still being written. I'm Maria Ellis, and I'm so grateful for this special space where I could share what changed my life. And now I invite you, share your testimony in the comments. Tell us where God met you or where you're still waiting for Him. Your story might be the next one to touch someone's life here.